Just looking for someone. Brother Benjamin, what does Deuteronomy mean? Don't look. No, just the word Deuteronomy. I don't think we discussed it. My brother, what does Deuteronomy mean?
Yeah, I think it's a repetition of the law.
Everybody hear that? Brother Dickens, what does Deuteronomy mean? The word Deuteronomy, what does it mean? Is everybody okay with that answer?
Yeah.
Repetition of the law. So, before we go to Deuteronomy 22 verse 5, let's go to chapter 1 verse 1. These be the words which Moses spake unto all Israel on this side Jordan, in the wilderness in the plain over against the Red Sea, between Paran and Tophel, and Laban and Hazeroth and Dizhab. There are 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir unto Kadesh Barnea. And it came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moses spake unto the children of Israel according to all that the Lord had given him in commandment unto them. Verse 5, on this side Jordan, in the land of Moab, began Moses to declare this law, saying, and then he begins to say. Does anybody want to make any comment on that? No comment? So, the law was first given in Sinai 38 years before this event. No, 40 years. They remain in Sinai for 2 years. They depart, and then the law is repeated here on the east side of Jordan in the land of Moab. If we quickly just turn over to the book of Joshua, chapter 1 verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses his minister, saying, Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. And if we jump forward to Let me check where we want to go to. Verse 8. Chapter 1, verse 8. No, we'll go to verse 7. Verse 6 says, be strong and of a good courage. It's that famous verse that we're all familiar with. Verse 7, only be thou strong and very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded thee. Turn not from it to the right hand or to the left, that thou mayest prosper whithersoever thou goest. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. So Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 3. It's the 11th month, first day of the month, in the 40th year. And Moses is going to declare the law. That's verse 5. Joshua 1, verse 1. Moses has now died, and Joshua is told to cross the Jordan and take the people into, we'll call it just the promised land. Explains the extent of the territory. He's told to be brave. Verse 7. He's told to observe everything that Moses had told him to observe, or told them. Verse 7, I'll read that again. Observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded. So I'm suggesting that that law that's been referred to in verse 7, Joshua 1:7, do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. I'm suggesting that that law is the same law in Deuteronomy chapter 1 verse 5. Any questions on that? Anybody disagree? Anybody have any problems, any questions on that? The connection between the two? All good? All straightforward?
I think the whole, to me, I think it's the whole Deuteronomy.
The whole of?
Deuteronomy.
Yeah, in Deuteronomy 1 verse 5, on this side, Jordan, in the land of Moab, began Moses to declare this law, saying, so he begins to speak. So he speaks the book of Deuteronomy, and now in Joshua 1:7, it says, do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded thee. If you go down to verse 8, it says, this book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. If I have not commanded thee, be strong and of a good courage, be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. For the Lord thy God is with thee. So this commandment to be strong and of a good courage, he's repeated it a few times now. Verse 6, be strong and of a good courage. Verse 7, only be thou strong and very courageous. Verse 9, if I have not commanded thee, be strong and of a good courage. So chapter 1 verse 8, it says, the book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night. So what book of the law is that? My sister, what book of the law, Sister Anne? My sister next to her with glasses. What book is that he's referring to? Deuteronomy? Everybody agree it's Deuteronomy? Yeah? You think it's Leviticus, not Deuteronomy? Everybody thinks it's Deuteronomy. Do you think it's Deuteronomy? You think it's...
Okay. Deuteronomy, it's...
No? Tell me the answer, what you think, not why you think.
I don't know which law it's repeating, but I believe it's the law that it's repeating is the same law that it's repeating. Because it's repeating.
It's not Deuteronomy. No? But you don't know what it is.
It's a law that is being written in Deuteronomy.
Oh, it's just the law in Deuteronomy, it's not the whole of Deuteronomy.
Because its definition is what? Traditional.
It said, this book of the law. So what is Deuteronomy? Just according to that statement.
Deuteronomy is the law.
Deuteronomy is the book
It's the book, yeah.
of the law.
Yeah.
That's its title.
But it's repetition. So what I'm trying to say is that the first mention of the law is what is the book.
Which book is that? You mean the book of Exodus?
I think I don't know.
But it's not Deuteronomy.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Why don't you think it's Deuteronomy
Because
when it says this book? What does this mean? If I said this one,
it's something you have in hand.
not necessarily at hand. It could be hundreds of miles away, it wouldn't have to be on hand. I could say, could you please go to this distant city and get a generator? And they'd say, which one? I'd say, this one, this picture. So it doesn't have to be close by. What does this one mean when it says this law? When you say that's close to, do you mean geographically close? What did you mean?
Maybe he had a scroll in his hand when he was referring to this book.
So maybe he had a scroll in his hand, he said, this one that's in your hand. And which scroll would he have in his hand? How many choices do we have?
2.
Maybe we could say 5. There's 5 books. So which one do you think it's talking about when it says this one? Which one would Joshua have in his hand?
I don't know exactly because we agreed that Deuteronomy is repeating the law.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to say is that by this book he means the real book. That is the real book.
The real one. Scooter? Did you have your hand up? I thought you had your hand up. You're going to answer my question?
Yes, from the beginning you asked what is...
Deuteronomy. I said, what book is it?
We defined what is Deuteronomy. You asked the question.
Right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we all agree
You said
it means...
the repetition of the law.
Do you agree with that?
So if we say what Joshua is having is the summary of all the first 4 books of Moses.
Just tell me what this book of the law is. Not why you think your answer is correct. Just tell me what book is that. You think it's Deuteronomy. And you're saying why?
Because it is the summary of all other books.
Because it's a summary of all the other books. My sister? Which book? Why?
Giving like a conclusion of after when he's writing Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, he was narrating the story. Now it gives like a summary or conclusion in Deuteronomy.
So because it's a summary, that must be the one that it's referring to.
Also the repetition of the law.
because it's a summary, repetition, that's why it must be that one. Yep. So, this is given in the 40th year. Moses is given the law, or he's going to speak these words, and these words end up becoming the book of Deuteronomy. He writes it down. We agree with that? You agree with that? Moses, whatever he speaks, he ends up writing it down and it turns into a book called Deuteronomy. Yep. Then Joshua 1, the context is Moses has died. If you go to chapter 4, verse 19, as you're turning to there, chapter 4.
Is it Joshua chapter 4?
Yeah, we're in Joshua. So you're in Joshua 4, I'm in Joshua 1. It says, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all the people, and take possession of the land. So he tells him to do that in chapter 1. Chapter 2, before he goes, he's going to send some spies. Chapter 3, he's going to begin to prepare. Chapter 4, he's going to cross. Are we okay with that? Chapter 1 is basically some instruction. If you go to verse 10 of chapter 1, we didn't discuss this, he actually begins to give instructions. He says, get ready, we're going to go. 1:10. Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, pass through the host and command the people, saying, prepare for 3 days' supplies. Prepare supplies, for in 3 days you're going to cross the Jordan. So between chapter 1 and chapter 4, it's 3 days. We're okay with that? 4:19. And the people came out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and encamped in Gilgal in the east border of Jericho. So we have a time frame. Deuteronomy is written or spoken on the first day of the 11th month, and they crossed the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month of the 41st year. You agree with that? It doesn't say 41st year, we've put that in. So it's approximately 2 months from when Deuteronomy is spoken to when they've crossed the river. And somewhere in that history, Moses dies. Yeah? So, coming back to chapter 1, verse 8. When it says, Joshua 1:8, when it says this book of the law, and then in the verse before it says, only be thou strong and very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded thee. Don't turn any other direction, but do what he said. This book of the law should not depart from you. When it says this, can we not say, do we not understand, are we not able to see that contextually, when he says this one, as Sister Elizabeth said, he's referring to, she didn't mean literally, the scroll that Joshua's got in his hand. He has something right before him, and what he's got right before him is the book that Moses has written. I don't know how long it took Moses to write the book, don't know when he begins writing it, but it must be within that 2-month period. Do you agree with that? Now when Moses dies, they don't start doing all of this instruction straight away, do they? there's a period of mourning. So we know that the speaking of Deuteronomy, the writing of Deuteronomy becomes important or critical to what instruction Joshua is going to have. Any questions on that? Could it be the book of Genesis that he was referring to? People say no. Why not Genesis?
Because the reason why it is not Genesis, when we go to Deuteronomy, chapter 1, we connect it also with Joshua. So when we connect it with Joshua chapter 1, and if you come to Joshua chapter 1 verse 7, then the law which is going to pay the very thing which Moses wrote on Deuteronomy chapter 1 verse 5, we identify that. So when verse 8 is going to come and say this book of the law, then is not referring to the other, but is referring to the law which were mentioned in book in verse 7, and that one of verse 7 is what we say that it is in verse 5, chapter 1 of Deuteronomy. So that's why it is not.
What's the purpose of Deuteronomy, my sister? To remind people of the law. Brother Rogers, what's the purpose of Deuteronomy? It's not to remind people of the law.
It's a set of instruction on how people will live in Canaan once they settle.
So the book of Deuteronomy is instruction given by God to Moses for whom? For the lay people. If you go to Joshua chapter 1 verse 8, who's this book written for? It's written for Joshua, isn't it? This is Joshua's instruction manual on how to direct and lead God's people once they get into Canaan. If we're okay with that. That's why that book, it wasn't written for Moses' benefit, because Moses already knows he's going to die. He already knew he was going to die before that event. So it's not written for him. It's written for the sake of Joshua, to instruct him on how to run the government, how to take care of the people when they get into Canaan. We know it's not Genesis, because when was Genesis written? Put your hand up, someone. When was Genesis written? Put your hand up if you have an answer. When was Genesis written? Sorry? In Midian. How many years ago is that? 40 years? 80 years? Sorry?
From this time when Moses died, 120, around 80 years.
80 years. So it's between 40 and 80 years, because we don't know when it actually got written, when he was in Midian. So it was written a long time ago. So when it says this one, it wouldn't be referring to that book, would it? Because it really has no relevancy to what is about to happen now. And we would assume we'd have to know some information that would say the book of Genesis has come into the discussion somewhere. Do you agree with that? You agree with that? You don't agree with that. So in Joshua 1 it says this one. How do you know which is the this one? And in verse 7, it says, do according to all the law which Moses commanded you. You Joshua, or you the people. So, which book is that one?
These are all the laws that God commanded Moses.
All of them.
Yeah. So they are written in one book. It's the book of the law. Then now they are handed to Joshua to come and down and deal with it.
What is the book of the law? Which book is that one?
The first 5 books.
So, you think it's talking about 5 books when it says that?
Is in the book of the law a special reference to the testimony of Moses? What was called the testimony of Moses?
Explain.
Well, the instruction that Moses is given, he puts together in a book and it's put on the side of the ark of the covenant. And I tend to think that that is what is being called the book of the law, not necessarily the whole of Deuteronomy. Of course, Deuteronomy almost bears the same content. But Deuteronomy also has other issues. It has other narrations of how they were traveling and all that. So specifically, the book of the law, I find to be the testimony of Moses.
And what is that book?
It is the book that contains the instructions that Moses has been given, most of what we have in Deuteronomy, but specifically,
So it's not Deuteronomy because it was written long before Deuteronomy.
no, it's written within the book of, you find it in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 31, it's now put into
Chapter 31. So go to Deuteronomy chapter 31.
22.
Which verse?
I think specifically I want to go to that 22.
31? No. Which verse?
I want to go to that 22. And Moses therefore wrote this song.
So I'll read it so people can hear. Moses therefore wrote this song the same day and taught it to the children of Israel. And he gave Joshua the son of Nun a charge and said, Be strong and of a good courage, for thou shalt bring the children of Israel into the land which I swear unto them, and I will be with thee. And it came to pass, when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law in a book, until they were finished, that Moses commanded the Levites which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, saying, Take this book of the law, and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there for a witness against thee. For I know thy rebellion and thy stiff neck, etc. So it's this book that it's been referred to.
Which is what we call the testimony of Moses.
Which is the writing of the words. So he's writing the words. If we go back, I think, Moses therefore wrote this song the same day and taught it to the children of Israel. So it's this song. So where does the song begin?
I think the song is all the instructions that he had been given to them.
Beginning when?
Let me confirm.
Okay. So as he's confirming, let's summarize. We're in Joshua chapter 1, verse 8. It says, This book of the law. Verse 7, it says, It's the book of the law which Moses my servant commanded thee. Then we go to Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 22. Moses therefore wrote this song, so there's a song that he sang, and taught it to the children of Israel. And he gave Joshua the son of Nun a charge and said, Be strong and of a good courage, for thou shalt bring the children of Israel into the promised land. And it came to pass, when Moses had made an end of writing the words of the song, I presume it's the song that you mean, or that it means, when it says the book of the law, or the law in a book, the words of this law in a book, until they were finished, then Moses said, Put it into the side of the ark. Does everybody okay with that sequence so far? So I just want to ask the question while he's looking. Verse 22, it says, Moses wrote the song, this song, and then he taught it to the people. And then in verse 24, it says, when he had finished writing the words, it says, of this law. So is the law the song? You agree with that? So in Joshua, if we're going to run back that way, then the book of the law is the Song of Moses. Everybody agree? You agree with that? You agree with that? Yeah? So all we need to do now is just find out what the Song of Moses is. Does anybody know what the Song of Moses is? Sorry? Exodus 15. Exodus 15, the Song of Moses. Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. So for in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 22, it says, Moses therefore wrote this song. So when it says this one, do you think it's Exodus 15 that he's now writing? You think that's the song that's even referring to? We're in Deuteronomy 31:22, and it says, Moses therefore wrote this song. And you think that song is the one that he sang in Exodus 40 years previous? That he's just going to write it now, and he's going to teach the people it now. Okay, so if we're not sure of that answer, I know we've got hands. Let's drop back to verse 19. Now therefore write this song for you, and teach it to the children of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against the children of Israel. For when I brought them into the land which I swear unto their fathers, that floweth with milk and honey, they have eaten and filled themselves and waxen fat, then will they turn unto other gods and serve them, and provoke me and break my covenant. And it shall come to pass, when many evils and troubles are befallen them, that this song shall testify against them as a witness, for it shall not be forgotten out of the mouths of their seed. For I know their imagination, which they go about even now, before I have brought them into the land which I swear. So that song is the song of verse 21 and is the song of verse 19. Sorry? And it came to pass, when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law in a book, they were finished. Verse 24, you said? It says law, it doesn't say song there. Yeah, that's what I said a few minutes ago. So I asked the question if we all agreed that the song in 22 is the law in 24. Everybody said that they agreed with that. And we'll go to verse 9. So the song, the first place people went to a song was the book of Exodus. We're trying to understand what the song is. We'll just go to verse 9. And Moses wrote this law and delivered it unto the priests, the sons of Levi, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, unto all the elders of Israel. Moses commanded them, saying, at the end of every 7 years, in the solemnity of the year of release, I guess you need to do something. Brother Robert.
So I wanted to say, the book of Exodus, the song that is in the book of Exodus, is happening 40 years, 38 or 40 years before this. Is a song of Moses is celebrating the deliverance that they've just had.
In Exodus.
Yeah, in Exodus.
Yeah.
So I do not find it necessarily being a particular set of laws that is supposed to put it somewhere. The book that we find, the song that we find in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 31, the first mention is in verse 19, but I think it is a synonym for the set of instructions that he has been receiving.
A synonym
For the,
for the set of instruction he's been receiving. When?
in the whole book of Deuteronomy.
Okay.
And you also find reference to this book.
One second. You took us back to chapter 19. Which verse?
No, I'm saying verse 19 or...
Oh, sorry, verse 19. Sorry. So verse 19, the one we went to. Now therefore write this song for you. So we know that song is a synonym for the law. We just proof text that. Anybody got a problem with that? No problem with that. Then you're saying song is synonym for instruction.
The law, yeah. It's the instructions that he has been receiving, which is the law.
So the instruction, the law is the song is the instruction, and the instruction is what he just said in the book of Deuteronomy.
And what he has been receiving. And you find its reference. I think the first time I find it being referred to is in chapter 17, verse
17,
19.
19.
Which book?
Deuteronomy. And it shall be with...
Verse 18.
Okay, so I'll drop back to... I'll just drop back to 16. But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord hath said unto you, ye shall henceforth return no more that way. So don't go back to Egypt. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. This is Deuteronomy 17, 17. And it shall be, when he sitteth upon the throne of his kingdom, this is the king, that he shall write him a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priests, the Levites. And it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes, to do them. So I just want to, if you allow some poetic license, it says here, a king is going to arise. Don't know if he's wise or bad, or even if they should have one. When he does, he shouldn't go back to Egypt, but what he should do when he sits on his throne, he should get the book of the law, I'll just say the book of the law, which the Levites own, and make a personal copy for himself. And the reason he's making a personal copy for himself is that he needs to read it, verse 19, and the reason he needs to read it so that he can learn to fear God and do God's will. So the first king that they have is Joshua, if we can call him a king. And what is Joshua commanded to do in chapter 1? Get that book. It doesn't say make a copy of it, but if we can say that, Moses gets Joshua makes a copy of that book and meditates upon it day and night. Because the objection that I was going to have is, if it's the book of the law, which is tucked into the ark, how can Joshua know what's in that book? Unless we're going to say he's got a good memory. So I know we could argue he's got a good memory, because it said in Deuteronomy 31, 19, it says, put this into the mouth of the people. So you could say they're required to memorize it. But if we tie in chapter 17 of Deuteronomy, if the king is supposed to make his personal copy, maybe Joshua does. So Coming back to Deuteronomy 17, 17. No, 18, 17, 18. So when he sits on his throne, he shall get a copy of this law, whatever that this law is. We know it's the song of Moses. So it has to be something that's pre-chapter 17. Make a copy of it. And this law, it says, a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priests of the Levites. So what does that mean? You need to make a copy of the book that the Levites have got. Everybody agree with that? And what book is that? The book of the law. Where did we read that? Where did we read that? The one that goes by the side. Where did we read that? 31 verse. I can't hear it, people. One person. Which verse?
Verse 22.
Deuteronomy 31, 26. Take this book of the law and put it in the side of the ark and lock it away, and no one can see it. It will just act as a silent witness, just like they can't see the Ten Commandments. It's all locked away. But the king is meant to make a copy of that one. And this is in the possession of the Levites. Is everybody okay in Deuteronomy 17, verse 18, that when it says, make a copy of the law which is before the priests, that's referring to 31, 26, this book of the law. Agree with that? Agree with that? So we're all in agreement. So we're now in chapter 17, and now we want to understand when it says a copy of this law, what law is it referring to? Finish your point, Brother Robert? What's this law?
I think it's the law that is going to make these people the governance of Israel. This is what they have been given from at least chapter 12.
Beginning from chapter 12. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
You said at least. That's fair enough. From at least chapter 12.
Yeah.
So we'll go to chapter 12 in a moment.
So it's,
Okay, make your point. Chapter 12.
it's the different set of instructions on what Israel is supposed to do on different occasions.
Okay, we'll go to 12 then. We'll go back to 12 perhaps in a moment. Chapter 12. These are the statutes and judgments which ye shall observe. Statutes and judgments, Brother Robert is saying, is the law of 1718. Everybody okay with that? Okay, so I want to ask a question. Who fully understands what he's just said? You got all the verses in your mind? Put your hand up if you've got all those verses in your mind. I need someone to help me. Who's got them in their mind? Someone has. Someone's taken notes or they've got good memory. Who's going to help the class? Volunteer. Come on. Will you do it? Okay. So all I want to know is, do we work backwards or forwards? We're going to work backwards. Okay, so I just want to write the verses down for those who are taking notes. That's why I'm asking someone to give us a hand. If he misses something, Brother Robert will give us a hand and guide us. Can I take this out? Yes. Okay, tell us where we're starting. We're going to start in Joshua chapter 1. All I want is a list of verses. And then once we've got the list, we'll speak our story. Is that okay? Joshua
chapter 1, read from verse 7 and 8.
Joshua 1, 7 and 8. Don't give us the story, just give us the verses.
Then we went to Deuteronomy, chapter 31. So, I understand from you have verse 9. So, someone also mentioned verse 24.
So I'm doing them in the order you gave.
At verse 19 and 22. Then we went to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 18, verse 17 and 18. Then we have now Brother Robert taking us to Deuteronomy chapter 12.
Twelve,
From verse 1.
verse 1. Has he missed anything? He has missed? What's he missed? Oh, it's good. Is the order good? Okay, so Exodus. Where do you want to put that? Where? If someone gave Exodus 15:1. Where do you want to put that?
After Deuteronomy,
Here? Or here?
between 18, after reading Deuteronomy 31, 18 to 21.
Okay, here. You want to put it here. Exodus 15. So all we need to do now is give the story. Sister Solange, you put your hand up. Can't hear you. Joshua 4. So let's do that then. Oh, we'll do that separately. Oh, no, we do that. If you're going to do Joshua 4, you'd have to go somewhere else first. Where? So give us the sequence then. First verse. Sorry, Joshua 1. Someone speaking? Someone's got a comment? Who is speaking? Go ahead. I can't see who that was. Who just put their hand up? Go ahead. Sorry? Good, we have it right here, Exodus 15. Is that right, Exodus 15, yeah? Good. My sister, can you run us through this story? So, what book of the law was Joshua instructed to take with him?
We were trying to look at what this book of law is. So, Brother Robert, suggested that this book of law is what is written in Deuteronomy 31.
So the book of the law that's in the Joshua is the one that's found in Deuteronomy 31. It says this book, and he's assuming that Deuteronomy, then Joshua, are sequential stories. Yes? How do you know they're sequential stories? It might not be a definitive proof, but how do you know they're sequential stories? That he can just go from chapter 1 of one book, and then go to just checking the number. To chapter 34 of the previous book, then 33, 32, and 31. What license do we have to do that? That it's not just two separate stories, it's not repeat and enlarge. How do we know that we can do that, Sister Snyder? What he's done, remember we had this problem in Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapter 11. I think we had some other examples of that. Oh, Deuteronomy 22. Are these connected thoughts or are they disconnected? If they're connected, then you can use that Daniel 11 model. You can go back, him. If it's not, like in Daniel 9, you can't say the prince and the prince. They're separate. Even though the story's the same, you can't do that. So what Brother Robert's done, he's taken the word, I'm not saying he thought about it this way, law or book, and just ran it through, and he got to Deuteronomy 31. He said it must be that one. So he's assumed that these books are connected. That it's just a continual story from Deuteronomy, and it goes seamlessly into Joshua. So he's assumed that, and everybody said they've agreed with his assumption. Do we have even a little bit of evidence to say, yeah, it's at least reasonable, if not provable? That's my question.
I think when Moses is writing this book and instructing the children of Israel, it's the same day that he's doing it. And
Same day he's doing it, writing? Or,
instructing.
so he's instructing them?
After writing it, he instructs them.
He doesn't instruct them, then write it?
I think he writes it.
31, he says, the song that you just sang, write it? Okay, either way, I don't mind, either way. So he writes, or he sings and he writes, either way. Okay?
And then a few days later he dies, then Joshua continues. So I think it's
A few days later he dies,
and then Joshua
takes over.
So Joshua may be referring to what has just happened.
So that's this story here that Sister Solange wanted us to remember. This gives us the... we'll go back to my brother.
Okay, just say that the reason why Brother Robert connected us from Joshua to Deuteronomy, is that the sequence is that after Deuteronomy 34 we see Moses dying, and then in Joshua 1 we see Joshua continuing with the work. So it's just a consistent thought. So if you have to go from 34 to 1, you see that it's a continuation. God is telling Joshua that Moses has died already. So it means that it has been a continuation all through. So we can go back and trace it all through.
Chapter 34 of Deuteronomy is the death of Moses. So Moses has just died. And then Joshua 1 verse 1 says, after Moses died, God is going to speak now to Joshua. After Moses died, God's going to speak to Joshua. And the time frame is only a few weeks. Because we had the beginning of November, not really November, to when? to the 10th of January. Beginning in November to the 10th of January. Yeah? Which is, I don't know how many days. About 2 months, is it? 70 days? Yeah? So it's about 70 days. So historically it's in that time frame. We can connect them together from these verses. Deuteronomy 1, Moses begins to speak. He dies in 34, so let's put that down. We should have put that here. Deuteronomy 1, 1 to 3. And then we'll just put the chapter. Deuteronomy 34. He speaks, he dies. 1:1 says, once he's died, then Joshua's going to receive some instruction, and then part of the instruction is to cross the river Jordan, and they cross it in chapter 4. So there's a nice running story all the way through. The last chapter of Deuteronomy and the first chapter of Joshua are the same story. So we've got, I would suggest, proof that we can link them together. Is that okay? It's easy to assume that we can, but we really need to make sure, it's an easy example I think, that it's a seamless transition from one to the other. Okay, so back to our story. We're just going to finish our story first. So my sisters... Sorry, you didn't agree with what? With this? With this? Okay, we'll do that in a minute then, because too late, you didn't do it before. So, you carry on with your story.
So I was saying what Joshua was instructed, the book that Joshua was instructed to take with him, that book of the law is what is written in Deuteronomy chapter 31.
So the book of the law in chapter 1 is this book of the law in chapter 31.
Yeah, that law in Deuteronomy 31, all the verses there, two words I used to have the song, being a synonym of that law,
We have song.
which is equal to
Okay?
I think that is Deuteronomy 31, the whole of it. And then what took us to Deuteronomy chapter 17 is that this law,
1 second. So that's basically the point of chapter 31, the summary of that. And then we went to chapter 17. You've missed a small piece of information here. He sings the song. So in 31, it says, therefore write this song. Sister Schneider, you okay that the writing is after the singing? Yeah? So he writes a song and he turns it into a book, and then what?
they place it beside the covenant.
Okay, so we'll just put, they put it into the ark. Yeah? So there's that bit that we need, that becomes relevant. Now we go to chapter 17.
So the I think that law in Deuteronomy chapter 31 is the same thing that the priest and the Levites are given in Deuteronomy 17, or what a king was supposed to have. That is what Deuteronomy 17 is saying.
So say
So
in a bit.
once a king has taken the throne,
So when a king takes the throne,
he's supposed to have this law that is found in Deuteronomy.
so when the king takes the throne, he does what?
He's supposed to write a copy of his own law.
He's supposed to write a copy of a law. What law is that?
Deuteronomy 12:1.
So it doesn't say that in the verses. Where is he going to get this law from?
From the priest and the Levites.
So we're saying he needs to write a copy of the law, and that law is the one that's owned by It's owned by the Levites. Did it say priests and Levites? Yeah? Okay. So it's owned by the priests and the Levites. And what we have done is assumed what law do the priests and Levites own or have responsibility for? What law is that? What did he assume?
That it's what has been given out from chapter 12.
No? What did he assume? What is this referring to?
The law that is in Deuteronomy 13.
So he's referring to this one here. He's assumed that. It doesn't say go to the ark and pull it out. He's assuming that. So let's just discuss that briefly. That assumption, can we verify that? Is that verifiable? So it turns from an assumption, at least a reasonable proof. Yeah? We assumed that you go from Joshua to Deuteronomy. Then we saw that we can prove that quite well. So my question is, I'll read 17:18. When you sit on the throne, write a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priests, the Levites. So, how do we make that assumption into a proof? Brother Dickens, you said yes?
I think in verse 18, first before we go to chapter 17, there was a point I wanted to make.
Connected or a different thought?
Connected to this,
Okay?
connected to the point she made. When you go back to,
The point who made? Sister Schneider? What point did she make?
she said, this is given in the same day. The song is given in the same day. But if you go to Joshua, it's being told under Joshua. And if you go to the Deuteronomy, where chapter 21, verse 9, it is being said to the Levite. And after being said to Joshua, was referred to that he should get a thing which was already given to the Levite and make a copy out of it. Isn't it? So it means they cannot be on the same day. One was given to the Levite and then was told to Joshua later that you take that copy and you also have it near the ark and then also have your copy.
We'll do that afterwards because that was a bit complicated for me. That aside, when it was given and whom it was given to, can you just do this? Make that connection.
Yeah, it's clear now because when we see here,
Sorry.
yeah, there, the top of the law is being given to priest and the Levite.
In where? In which chapter?
Chapter 17,
In chapter 17,
yeah,
what's being given to the priests and the Levites?
the law.
Is it? They already have it. It's not given to them in chapter 17. In 17, they already have it. I just want to know which one it is. They already have it, and the king's going to say, can I borrow your book so I can make a copy of it for my own personal use? Is that you don't read 18 like that?
Yeah, it means they had it previous to 18, isn't it?
Okay, yes, they've already got the book, it's their book, and he says, can I borrow your book?
Yeah.
I'll make a copy of it. Okay, so the question is, what law is that? Make a copy of this law in a book. He doesn't even say they have a book, he just said they have a law. It says, which is before the priest. So I just want to know, Brother Robert said, that one there is the one that they put in the side of the ark. That's the one it's referring to.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm saying he's assumed that. So I'm asking for some evidence. What we need to do, what he's done, is he's tied chapter 31 with chapter 17. How do you tie them together? You can proof text things, but often it can get problematic. So he's used a secondary proof besides the word laws and all of that. He said that this law is this one, but we need to just prove that it is. How do you go about at least some proof, even if, some evidence? Does everybody understand that? If you just do linear proofs, you can end up making mistakes. So if you just proof text the word song or law, you can go from 31 to 17, no problem. And then you can go even to 12, no problem. But we want to make sure that what we're doing is correct to actually tie them together, that it is that. So if as many proofs as we can have. So I'm saying, he's assumed that. How do we go about showing that? Anyone else? Anyone else who hasn't spoken?
Yeah. So what I'm seeing in Deuteronomy 31:18, yes, 31:18.
31:18. And I will surely hide my face.
No?
17:18.
No. Yeah, 17:18 is telling us that the king who is to arise is to write the copy of the law and have his own copy. So when you go to Joshua, he is the next leader who is coming. So this Deuteronomy will tell us that Joshua is not going to have the copy from somewhere, but it's going to derive his book from this law which was given to priests and the Levite. So I think it's the proof that this is the same law, because Joshua is not going to bring something new, but he's going to write the copy basing on what is given to the priests and the Levite.
Okay, so you're doing it, that's the argument we used a while ago. Joshua is the king, a new king is going to arise, so they would do the same thing.
Yeah. It's not going to.
Brother Robert?
I think in Deuteronomy chapter 17, what is happening, it's an instruction on what the kings are supposed to do when they come. So the instruction is that when they come, they need to go to the priests and the Levites and get a copy of a book of the law that they have. So the book is not yet there. It's actually a reference to what should happen in the future. So you have to ask yourself.
Oh, stop there. Do we all know that? When it says that the priests have the law in chapter 17, they don't have the law yet. Yeah? It's talking about what will happen in the future, because they don't even have a king. Yeah? So it's all future.
Yeah, so we have to ask ourselves, where do we see the priests and the Levites receiving the law? And the point where you begin now seeing a book of the law is in chapter 31, and in fact it's put in the Ark of the Covenant, which is in the sanctuary, meaning that it's now under the care of the priests and the Levites. Yeah.
I think it was the same argument I wanted to give. You read from verse 14.
Which?
Deuteronomy chapter 17.
17:14. When thou art coming to the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shall possess it, and shall dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. So the point you want to pick up is when you come into the promised land. That's the point we want to pick up.
Immediately this verse tells you that they have not yet a king.
Yep.
So Moses, as we already stated, Moses first will sing the song, then write a book. So if you begin from Deuteronomy chapter 1, Moses has been singing the song, has been addressing the people, the congregation. So, and now he's giving them instruction and giving them instruction about things that have even not yet taken place. Like in verse 14, he's telling them, when you come into that glorious land, I'm going to set a king. And this king now is the one who is to receive a copy of the law that will be given to the priests and the Levites. So when Moses, in Deuteronomy chapter 31 now writes the law, it was put into the ark, and it is the priests and the Levites to ministers there. They are the ones who takes care of everything in the sanctuary. So what Moses is just saying here, he will eventually write it. And now, when they get to the land, which as we speak have not gotten there, Moses has told them that the law that he will now write in chapter 31 is to be given under the care of the priest and the Levites. The king who is to come is not to take the law from the priest and the Levites.
Say that in a short version.
So
I agree with what you said. I think it was what Brother Robert said. But say it in a short version so we can all hold on to that thought.
So verse 17 from verse 14 is giving us the logic that what Moses is saying has not yet happened. They are not yet to the glorious land.
Chapter 17, verse 14 says, whatever's talking about this king and he's getting a copy from the priest has not happened yet. The priests haven't received anything yet, and the king hasn't received anything yet.
Yeah. So Moses is singing the song. Chapter 31, he finishes addressing the people and he now writes the law.
So in chapter 31, he finishes the song, he writes the law, it gets put into the ark.
Exactly. Now, in Joshua's time, when they have gotten to the promised land, the king who is to come is to get the law from the sanctuary in the ark where the priests and the Levites have been taking care of it. Yeah, so the same law in verse 31 is the same law here, only that here it's not yet written.
So we used verse 26. It's not up there actually. We had verse 24, and let's put verse 26 up. Why are we putting 26? Take this book of the law and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there for a witness. And verse 25, that Moses commanded the Levites which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, saying, take the book and put it in the side of the ark. If we go back to verse 9, because my brother spoke about verse 9, we didn't deal with verse 9. I'll drop back to verse 8, no, verse 7. And Moses called Joshua and said, in the sight of everybody, be strong and of a good courage, for you must go with this people into the land. Verse 8. The Lord, he it is that doth go before you. So God's going to be with you, and he won't fail you, so don't be distressed. Verse 8. Verse 9. And Moses wrote this law and delivered it unto the priests, the son of Levi, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and unto all the elders of Israel. And Moses commanded them, saying, at the end of every 7 years, in the solemnity of the year of release, when everyone's come together, what should you do? Read the law. Verse 11. So I like the wording in verse 9. It says, he got this law and he delivered it to the priests. And then in 17, it says, it gives an allusion to the ark, because in 17:18, it says, copy of this law of the book, which is before the priests. I don't know if we pick up the word before means that the ark is before them, or at least it's been delivered to them. So you can see it in verse 9 and in verse 26. So I think we could do some more study on that, but I think if we're happy, this assumption is more than just some assumption that we made up. We can prove that it is the same law that's being referred to. Then the last point that was brought up, in the context of these chapters, when you go to verse 12, it says, these are the statutes and judgments which ye shall observe to do in the land which the Lord God of thy fathers giveth to thee. So it's statutes and judgment, or law, and you can connect that to 17:14, It says, and when you're coming to the land, when you come into the land, you need the statutes and the judgments that are for the land, don't we? We know that they had different statutes and judgments in the wilderness and the land. Do we agree with that? Yeah? So some of the statutes and the judgments that are given in Exodus, are they applicable when you go into the land? They're not. So we might argue that Deuteronomy is repeating in large of the other 4 books, but the version that's given in Deuteronomy is the version for what? For the land. And so the things that are not relevant are taken out, like you can't make fires on the Sabbath. So that rule is cut out from Deuteronomy. It's not there. It's not applicable anymore. But people, I think, often don't appreciate that. So they say if the law is in Exodus, it must follow through into Canaan. And it doesn't. That's just one example. There are rules that are applicable for wilderness wandering, and there are other rules that are applicable for living in Canaan. So if we were to argue it's all the books that he's referring to, or it's just a summary of everything that was written before, those things can't apply, because the issue of fire is only one example. There are others. If we started digging deeper, that the conduct for wilderness is not the same conduct for Canaan. Fire is one. What's the other one? The easy one. Food. The food that you have in the wilderness, the way you gather all the social issues that are surrounded concerning your food, do not get brought into Canaan. So all the laws have to be different. You can't take those laws and bring them into Canaan with you. Are we okay with that? You get into problems if you start introducing a concept in a generic sense that it's all of his writings. You can just sort of dump them into a concept or an idea. It seems the way when he says this book, and he says it more than once, he doesn't just say it in Joshua, we've already read it in Deuteronomy, when he says this thing, it's something specific. It's not just this generic concept about obey God, because there are certain things you obey him in Canaan that you didn't in the wilderness, and vice versa. Are we okay with that? So class is finished. Anybody had any comments? Some people had their hand up. My brother at the back.
Just seeing the transition from Deuteronomy to Joshua, and when you look at Deuteronomy, the last 3 chapters, 31 to 33, it talks about the death of Moses, and the law that is being referred by Moses. I believe it's the same law that is given to Joshua. That's what to agree with that logic.
Okay, you want to agree with the logic of how we tie these two things together. My brother? You said you didn't agree with something. What did you not agree with?
Okay, the thing which I did not agree, so when you go to Joshua chapter 1, there's a law there, and that law, Joshua was commanded. So by taking the word, this law, I was not thinking that that is the right word to take, because the question which we would have asked is that where was Joshua commanded? Because if we are going to take only this law, in Deuteronomy itself only, it has been repeated 10 times. Or which if we take the word this law, we may fall on the wrong side. So I will see in verse 31, yes, it is true. That is where the proof is. But only this law cannot help us. And that's why we have missed. So the law, I was saying it is a law in verse 9. Because if you go to in the same chapter 31.
31 verse 9.
Yeah, that is where the proof is. But I was disagreeing with the word, this law only to be the one running out through, without connecting it with this one.
Okay, so let me try and tell if I've understood you correctly. You agree with the idea, that what Joshua is talking about, or what's been spoken about in Joshua 1, is all of this subject in chapter 31. You agree with that, but the way we've proven it, you're not confident with. Okay? So all we've done in this class is we've taken a very basic, we've only done it in 1 hour, maybe even less, a very basic construction of a history. We haven't studied the verses properly. I would say just did a very basic cursory overview. But if we agree with that logic, based upon what we've done, I think we could go back and we could do a secondary, maybe even a tertiary proof. We haven't even gone to the spirit of prophecy yet to confirm any of this. We could reinforce everything that we've learned. Now, you said the law, that is not a good way to do it. I would perhaps suggest that it's fine to do it, but it's not the only way. It's not the end of the proof. We could go to other ways of proving this, which would support and help. And when we did that, we might find that the other way was the better way, and the term this law would have been a supporting evidence. So if there's two evidences, we've just gone for one of them and we've said, because this was our first one, this is the primary one, and there's a secondary one. You're saying, I think the secondary one is a better logic, and this law, is a supporting evidence. We may end up going down that route if we were to look at this even further. Is that a fair summary of what you've said? Yeah? Everybody understand that? We've only taken one concept. We could have looked at it in different ways. And maybe our logic that isn't the best way of approaching it. Maybe there's even a better logic. But that's not to say that the logic is invalid. We all agree with that? Okay, so what we've done, before we go to Deuteronomy 22, is we've set the stage of trying to understand what the book is about, what this verse is all about, its context. We know it's about law, not just law. What else is it? It's the repeating of the law, because that's the definition of the name. So when he repeats the law, not every law is going to get repeated. We know that. So this concept of repetition of the law is more of a principle than a literal repeating of the law. Because if you're going to repeat it, you could just read the books before. So he's going to take this principle. So the repeating of the law is to take that law. If I just say that law was those first 4 books, you're going to take that law and you're going to do what with them? You're going to repeat them in a way that becomes suitable or fitting for Canaan. Because some of that stuff is not suitable, is not applicable to Canaan, so you have to rewrite it. We can see contextually that around chapter 12, we can begin to see that the law is being discussed. For certain we can see that. So chapter 22 is somewhere in here between chapter 12 and chapter 31. 22 is in here. It begins to talk about the law. The whole subject here is about the law. So we know that Deuteronomy 22 verse 5 is about law in some shape or form. So what do we know so far about our subject? Verse 5, men and women can't wear the same thing. What is it? It's to do with the law, and it's specifically to do with what context? When you go to Canaan. So we don't see this instruction before ever, do we? So this instruction isn't given before because before what was the issue? They were not in Canaan. So this has to be something specific that deals with Canaan. Otherwise it would have been given before. The rules that were specific for wilderness that they needed for that time period were all given to them. This one wasn't. Now the discussion is, when you go to Canaan, don't do this thing, because something's going to change in Canaan. So we want to take that point. as you review the book of Deuteronomy, because I'm sure you're going to go ahead and do that now, what you'll find is that the book of Deuteronomy is divided into certain portions, certain segments. So as you do that, try and look through this book and try to get the book and divide it into the portions. Remember we did that with Millerite history. Yeah? We were able to do it with Millerite history. We divided it into certain portions. And those certain portions had titles to them. Remember that? So one of them was small towns, then cities, and then, what was the other one? The solitary labour was the small towns, then the big towns, then there was something, and then they had the camp meetings. There was one in between, I can't remember what that was. Oh, general conferences. They had general conferences, number 3, and then they had the tents. So you can divide Millerite history into those portions. So in Deuteronomy, you can divide it into portions. So have a look where you can divide Deuteronomy and what those divisions are trying to teach us. We'll do that in our personal studies. So that we all remember, it's Friday, preparation day. We only have one class for me. So the next class will be Elder Tess's. So this will be for tomorrow. We're not continuing our class after breakfast. Okay? So if you can try and remember what we've done for tomorrow. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for the great privilege of being able to come together and to learn together. Lord, when your people, even if it's only 2 or 3, come together, you have promised that you would be with them. And for us, when we experience that you are with us, we see the effects of that we can bring our own thoughts and our own ideas and bring them to bear upon this subject. We thank you, Lord, that the many minds that are here, as we have contributed to the building up of this story, that all of us are in agreement with, that you have shown evidence on 2 levels, that you've taught us by bringing mind with mind, and that we're all in agreement with these conclusions, and therefore we must all be in unity of the Spirit. We thank you, Lord, for this. Help us to keep these thoughts in our minds as we apply the rules and the principles that you have given to us, so that we have a clearer understanding of what verse 5 means for us. We pray in Jesus' name.